have enough time for our wonderful guest speakers here today. So we'll give everyone just another minute to join us, and we'll get started. Okay. Let's get started if that's all right with everyone. Well, it is with great pleasure to introduce Jay, Eury, and Becky Clawson to our speaker series event. Jay is a marketing and market development educator based in Adams County. He has experience with, and he creates educational programming for farmers market development, direct marketing, food security, food policy councils, and the Anchor Institution food system development. Celeste, would you like to introduce Becky, please?
Gladly. So Becky is along with Jay Eury with Penn State Extension. She's a Penn State Extension educator based in Lancaster, and she specializes in local food systems. She sees her work as building bridges between the various players in the supply chain. And that goes from farmers who grow it, and the businesses and organizations that distribute it, and ultimately the community members who eat it. So that's a little bit about Becky, and I'll give it back over to you, Steph. Thank you.
Thanks. So this is a really exciting presentation for us because not only do we have wonderful presenters, but we're also going to have a hands-on activity here. So Jay and Becky are going to walk us through, basic intro to asset mapping for community development, and then we're going to go right into an activity which is really like a practice run, first pass at asset mapping, and then we're going to wrap it up and come up with some next step ideas. And then afterwards, we are going to have a brief general FPAC meeting, and it's really just to give updates on the subgroups. So do stick around for that. And on that note, I'd like to pass everything over to Jay and Becky. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Hey, Jay, we're still seeing the slides in presenter mode.
Okay, thank you. Good looking out. How about now?
Great.
Get better?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So thank you everybody for joining us. It's so nice to see smiling faces. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm so lucky to have a job that I care about, that involves food and agriculture and talking to people about food and agriculture. So I appreciate you letting Becky and I have the time to share some of our, I don't know, it feels a little strong to call it expertise, but we'll say it, our expertise, and be a resource to this group achieving their goals. So to briefly introduce Extension, I think when most people think of Extension, they think of farmer stuff. We usually do a lot of farmer programming. We also do a lot of food programming, really all along the food supply chain, and we'll call it the community side of the food system. So not just farmers, dairy farmers and 4-H, but also restaurants, farmers markets, food banks, public schools, logistics providers, food policy councils, anybody that's making those connections between farmers and the communities that they operate in and that they serve. We see communities all over the country asking pretty similar questions that we heard the Eury leadership group asking, which is essentially, why is food, nutrition, and public health so messed up and so hard? And how can we make it better? And I think, yeah, Becky and I talking before this call, that we really think, again, in our limited expertise, in our experience, that we see the Eury Food Policy Council making such thoughtful and purposeful steps to get your efforts off to the best start possible. And so I just want to say thank you again in introducing ourselves to be able to play a part in that. So our job today is to provide some context and some outside perspective, and then some useful tools. But really, you guys are in charge with the next steps that you're going to take and how you're going to put this to work. So today we're going to talk about a thing called asset mapping. Asset mapping to strengthen regional food systems is the gist. We'll go over what asset-based community development is in a nutshell. We'll talk about what exactly we mean when we say assets. We'll have a brief breakout activity, which will be to practice what we just presented on, which we'll call asset mapping. And then we'll have a little bit of time for thinking about what comes next, what the Eury Food Policy Council is going to do with this tool, if you guys choose to.
Great, thanks for kicking that off, Jay. I'm gonna talk quickly. I want to be mindful of time. We've got a lot of fun stuff to get through today. I want to make sure that we do the topic justice, but I'm just going to move through it. There's just so much to cover. So a little overview about asset-based community development. Asset mapping is really just one part of this broader approach called asset-based community development. That's rooted in community organizing, really. It's an approach that's creating community-based solutions for the community by the community. So the traditional way to approach community and economic development has typically been to start with a needs assessment. And the folks who are really out in the forefront of this approach that we're diving into now, Kretzmann, McKnight, you'll see their names come up a lot in the academic research side of this. They felt that method, the needs assessment, it puts a lot of emphasis on the things that communities lack. It portrays communities as being helpless to some extent. And the result from that often entails bringing in outside expert and resources to address the issues that exist within the community. And when you bring in outside experts and resources, then you get solutions that they might lack community buy-in, or they might overlook certain important community factors. So instead, they proposed an asset-based community development strategy, which is empowering the community by identifying its assets and opportunities and leaving the community in the driver's seat of developing the solutions. So by starting a community planning process with the assets rather than identifying the needs or doing a SWOT analysis, some of you might be familiar with, starting with assets really sets the tone. It gets people excited about the resources that are already present in their community, like unutilized land, rich cultural stories, rather than putting the focus on what's missing, like we have a lot of vacant lots or we have high unemployment. So focusing on the needs and deficiencies in a community, that tends to put a negative focus on symptoms of what are arguably bigger issues. And that often results in short-term programs that might minimize those symptoms in the short run, but sort of lacks that long-term sight and vision for the community itself. And that's not to say that we have to ignore the needs or the problems that exist in a community. Those are real. But we're going to use asset mapping identifying those assets as a starting point to address those. Okay, so you're probably wondering, what do we mean by assets? And we're going to dig into that. So the Oxford English Dictionary defines an asset as a useful or valuable thing, person, or quality. And at the heart of asset-based community development is a belief that communities are really rich with resources and talented people, and that our task is to identify those assets through the mapping process so that we can connect them, connect with them, build relationships, share information, build a shared vision, and then leverage the community's collective strengths for the good of the community. There are lots of categories you could use, and personally, I don't think it matters which categories you land on, as long as they work for you and your purpose and they speak to your needs. Here are some, just to get the wheels turning, that we've suggested just to kind of get things started. So at the top of this, at the core of this, we have people. Arguably the most important category. If you look at all of these other categories, they're things, they're places, but at the heart of them, to access any of those, you have to go through people, through relationships. And so when you're identifying people, those individuals with talents, time, resources, connections, among those you want to look for capacity finders. Those are people who they're naturally good at bringing other people in, connecting resources. But there are lots of folks in your community, arguably everyone has some strengths, some talents, some willingness to help that they can bring to the table. Other categories that we'll look at and include in an asset mapping activity might be organizations, institutions like schools, hospitals, might be government agencies and services. It might be the city's infrastructure, land or property or natural spaces. And it could be the culture and art that exists among your residents.
And just to interject here, the image on the bottom of this slide I particularly like. I like leading with love, so I like that big heart in the middle of the image. And I think just to make that point abundantly clear, that's really the key. All of these kind of categories that Becky talked about, organizations, institutions, government, exactly how we're going to define something isn't as important as the people that work within those organizations, institutions, or whatever, what they care about, what gets them out of bed in the morning, keeps them going back to work day after day, sets their priorities around the things that are most important to them, and that also bring them joy. And I think bringing that perspective to community and economic development that's kind of the breath of fresh air part of asset-based community development, as opposed to look at this problem and all of these, for instance, poor people, and we just don't have enough, and let's try and fix this. So I just like that image, and I wanted to make that point extra clear. Thank you, Becky.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, so then we've talked about assets, and then we can move on to asset mapping. As you may have already concluded, is just that process of identifying the assets, organizing a community's assets. And this could happen any number of different ways. There are lots of ways to do this. There are some toolkits at the end of this presentation, some link to resources that have kind of starter guides for going through this process, and they all look a little bit different. We'll have some examples to show you. So this could be a group brainstorm where you bring a bunch of people into a room and you just start, shouting out ideas, maybe filling out sticky notes and putting them on the wall. Maybe there's a shared document similar to the activity we're going to do today. You could have focus groups with community members. You could issue online surveys through email or Facebook. You could conduct one-on-one interviews. You can pull from data that already exists out there through other online directories, phone books, yellow pages. Those are all great places too. And then the way you compile that information, again, there are a lot of ways to do this. None of them are more right or wrong than another. It really has to be about the system that's going to work for you, that you're able to maintain, and that works for your end goal. So you could keep all this information in a spreadsheet if that's what works. You could add sharing privileges if you want to make it a publicly accessible document. You could take that spreadsheet and dump it into Google Maps and map out these places on a map. You could get fancy with some GIS mapping, which is just a little bit beyond me. There are a number of online mind mapping services. Some are free. You could Google free online mind mapping tool, and you'll find a lot of different tools out there. Miro and Creately are a couple that I've come across. And again, sticky notes on a wall does the trick too. We just want to reiterate here that people and individuals are really at the heart of this process, and the best data you're going to get is going to come from those people who have firsthand experience with the assets in your community. They're going to take you places that you didn't think to look. So in those brainstorms, those interviews, whatever they are, really dig deep and ask them about the tools that they're already using, that are in their community, that you might not know about and might not come up in, say, a search of other online directories. So we have some examples we'll just run through pretty quickly in the interest of time. These are just to get you some visual inspiration for what this process could look like. This is sort of like a virtual sticky note layout from Buy Fresh, Buy Local of Greater Lehigh Valley. This is what that could look like in person. These are a couple of online tools that aren't necessarily asset maps. They're food system maps, but it's a similar concept. If you want to get a little bit more fancy. You could hand draw a map. Great, so I hope that gave you a little bit of inspiration. It could look totally different than any of these. The options are really endless.
So I'm going to interject again with a couple of caveats. I love the idea of this. I think that this all looks really nice. I love the idea of abundance, even though I'm often stuck in a scarcity mindset, especially in the last 2 years or so. And yeah, and I'm all on board with asset-based community development. So I don't want anybody to think differently. But a couple of caveats here about this approach, some limitations. One is that in reality, communities do not have all of the assets that they need, just kind of lying about undiscovered. For example, a lot of communities in both urban and rural settings don't have sufficient infrastructure. They don't have adequate public transportation. They don't have quality broadband internet. They don't have safe and affordable housing. They don't have accessible sources of quality food. And knowing all the people on a particular block or in a particular village isn't going to immediately make the roads better or lay down broadband internet lines. So communities don't have all the assets that they need. communities also don't exist in a vacuum. The needs and deficiencies that you could see or kind of point out, like for instance, lack of public transportation, are not natural. They're the consequence of the decisions and priorities of past and present elected officials and business leaders. They're the result or reward of our laws, our local, state, and federal funding priorities, the actions of individuals, as well as the ideas and memory and culture that don't treat all humans as equal. I don't want to gloss over that reality. So when we, look at a community, wherever it might be, and say, oh, there's something missing here. There's not, there's some sort of problem. Like there's not a grocery store, for instance. That didn't just happen in a vacuum. And we can't just put lipstick on a pig. So happy talk or looking at a glass half empty and turning it upside down is not the action that's needed to address historic inequity or a lack of resources or a lack of equal opportunity. So I just want to make that point that asset-based community development is a way better approach to think about the field of community development, the work of community development, than the alternative. But on its own, doing stuff with sticky notes is not going to change the lived reality of people in a particular community. And then just one other point about language. I think sometimes we have limits on how precise our language can be, and language is always evolving. It's kind of a flexible thing. But when I hear the word assets or resources, and I think about when I start thinking about people as assets or resources, that a thought that comes into my mind is that resources are used, resources can be exploited, and I just want to make the point that people and land are more than assets or capital or resources for us to put to work. That we're not necessarily the masterminds that get to be in charge of everything, nor do we have the power and authority to take actions that affect all of those assets in some kind of masterminding way. And I think we could all come up with examples of how, in particular in the Western world, we think about assets and resources in this way, and it kind of creates some separation between us and, for instance, the natural world, or a farm field, full of what we call weeds and pests. And the way that we try to solve for those problems can kind of create more problems down the road when we think that we can kind of command and control things. So again, those caveats and additional context said, there are a lot of untapped assets in communities. An asset-based, human-centered approach, even though the language is a little imperfect, is a great way to improve communities and improve the realities for people living in communities. I think that's it. I think that's it for caveats and context. So Becky's gonna start to lay out an activity where we can put this concept into practice.
Thanks, Jay. So we're gonna go into 2 breakout rooms. We're gonna split the group up, and we're just gonna take a first pass at doing some asset mapping. We picked 2 categories for each room. Group 1 is going to be brainstorming, identifying organizational and physical or land assets. Group 2 is going to be identifying institutions and cultural assets. And this is just really a freestyle brainstorm where we have a Jamboard set up. Let's drop the link there into the chat. We have a Jamboard set up. Do you have that handy, Jay?
Yeah, I'll put it up here. I got your link.
Okay. Everyone should have editing access, I hope, if I did it right. And yeah, we're just going to give this a try. Everyone will take their own sticky notes and add them under the categories. We should kind of fill it up. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about the process. So we'll have a facilitator in each room. Jay and I will be there. And we'll just kind of ask questions along the way and encourage different ways to brainstorm this. So with that said, are we all, anything else you want to add, Jay?
Yeah, I think before we head out, because I'm always kind of slow on setting up a breakout room. I wonder if folks have questions. I'm going to share the screen of the, looks like we've got 8 or I don't know, 7 or 8 people in the link, but I'm going to share my screen with this, what it's called Jamboard, with this online tool, which is basically just a blank board you can put sticky notes on, and see if folks have any questions about the activity. So what everybody should be looking at, if you have a computer, if you have the ability to open up the chat here in Zoom and click on the last link, and open up into your web browser. We have a first page here on the very first page, just so you can kind of acquaint yourself with the tool. If you click on any of these post-it notes, you can either right click and get a couple of options, or you can click on the sticky note and then a little circle with 3 dots will appear, and you can duplicate or copy, and then you can edit that sticky note and write in here whatever you want, and you can change the color, and that's about all you can do. So it's a pretty simple tool, but it's a really quick and easy and savable way to do that kind of brainstorming in a group where everybody can work at the same time, and create a bunch of post-it notes on a board without one, like elbowing each other, or two, in this current context, coughing on each other. So does anybody have any questions about either the tool that we're using or the activity as we set up and break out in, let's see, how many people do we have? Do you think we should do 1 breakout room? Do you think we should do 1 or 2? What do you guys think?
I think 1 room's not really a breakout.
Yeah.
Right.
What do we think? Well, I have 14 people. I guess that's a 2-room situation. Okay, so I'll set up breakouts. If anybody has questions, please direct them to Becky while I nervously type and set up Zoom breakout rooms.
We should have some music we could play.
Becky, are you able to put that link in the chat again, please?
Sure. So when we get in here, we're going to go, by clicking on the top slides, that top center slide deck that you see, we're going to go to the test page and just add your name under the group that you end up in. And that way we'll also sort of have a roll call for who is in the session. But other than that, the notes will be anonymous.
And Katie, Chris, I'm sorry that I have to leave you. The way that Zoom is set up, we have to leave someone with host privileges in this main room. I'm sorry to leave you on an island back here, but you'll be in charge of our home base. If anybody wants to, they can leave our breakout room and come back and hang out with Katie.
Come to the island.
But we'll be back. We'll be back in about 12 minutes. I think so. We've got 2 rooms set up. Let's see, and I think let's open the rooms. Everybody should get the ability to move to your breakout rooms now. Let's see, Katie. I don't know how to do this. Can you hear me, Katie?
Yep, yeah, loud and clear.
So because I set up the breakout rooms, I'm the one that's going to be left back on the island as opposed to in the room. Do you feel comfortable?
Facilitating something?
Yeah, going into room 3 with Pearl, Stephanie, Tabitha, Madison, Santella, and Elizabeth, and working through the. I'm sorry to spring this on you. I did not know this would happen. And working through the group 2. So you're going to be brainstorming institutions and cultural assets.
Yeah.
And there's no wrong answers. There's literally no wrong answers. Everyone can make post-it notes as they want. You can put them wherever you want on the page. Ideally, they're on the group 2 page. But any institutions in Erie County or beyond, and any cultural assets. That's the whole point of the activity. And I'll shoot you a text once I send you over to the room so that we can have a dialogue if any questions come up.
Perfect.
Okay. Let's see. Can I have your number real quick just to make sure?
Yep, 814-490-8862.
814-490. What's the last one?
862.
62. Okay. Thank you for being game. Sorry about this. Yeah. 3. Thank you. Hey, Stephanie. Do you want me to send you to the breakout room? Oh, uh-oh. Let's see. It looks like it's muted for some reason. It doesn't look like your Zoom is muted, but I'm not hearing your voice. Now your Zoom is muted. Now your Zoom's unmuted. Now your video is off.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep.
All right. I'm on a mobile device. I do have my computer set up, but usually with meetings I get kicked off. So
Okay.
I can't get into the breakout room, but I do have it pulled up on the computer. I can see what everybody's doing.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Let's see. Let me see.
I'm going to try to join Zoom from the computer, but I really have issues, so I apologize.
Oh, no, it's okay. No worries.
Living in the country, internet is not
it's
an asset to have.
Yep. No, it really is. Yeah, and knowing your neighbor is not an immediate fix to that. It can be. It could be a step.
All right, I'm in. I'm gonna log out of here.
Okay. Hey, Tabitha.
I decided to come to the island because I cannot speak to their community assets. I'm not there.
Oh, fair point. Yeah, super fair point.
I stayed long enough to say hi, nice to meet you all. I'm gonna go to the island.
Nice. Welcome to the island.
Thanks. Did you get my email earlier today by any chance?
I did about attending this call or
Yeah,
the DEI resources.
Dan had forwarded the invite a while back and had just said, if you have the capacity, this might be a great way for you to connect with folks through the project and otherwise. Yeah, I'd love to. We threw it on the calendar and then saw it coming up today. It's like, oh, right. Because I met with Becky in other spaces and some of these folks ahead of time. I didn't just want to like show up strangely without.
No, they're definitely welcome. I kind of get the vibe that they're game to talk to anybody, meet with anybody. Yeah, I'm glad that you're in the room.
They're a really great group.
Yeah, I think they've been. You might very well know more about this group than me, but I think they've been in existence for about 2 years and started mostly through the public health department, through the work of Alex Whipple. At least that's my impression. I don't know if that's accurate. It's probably more complex than that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the origin. I met Alex when I talked with them back in the spring. Dan had connected me with them then as well. And I had just introduced the food shed mapping project to them then. And at that time, we thought we were going to be launching before the end of summer when we had no clue about how many bugs were involved in getting that thing off the ground.
Yeah.
Way back then.
How long have you worked for PASA?
I've just been with PASA for a little over a year. I joined them this time last year roughly, and they hired me specifically for the food shed mapping project. And it was still in its infancy, just coming to fruition when I came on board.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. At that time, we were all, excited to move it forward and a bit naive, I think, to the extent to which we'd have to actually dive into the technology development component. So it's been really interesting. Yeah.
That's really where the rubber hits the road.
And you've been with Penn State longer than, so I remember in the food or in the farm to school committee, I remember when you came on board there, was that when you joined Penn State or were you with Penn State and you were just in a different capacity?
I started with Penn State a year and a half ago in June of 2020. So yes, I mean, my sense of time is defined by, hopefully once in a millennium pandemic. So well into the pandemic, and I've been working from home since then. I grew up in Franklin County. I still live here in Franklin County, South Central PA, and then I work out of the Adams County Extension Office.
Yeah.
And I've done. I mean, I'm interested in food systems work broadly. That's what I was doing before Extension. Just trying to find the places to kind of fit in and make the best use of my skills as possible, especially here in South Central Pennsylvania. It's the place I care about, and I see food and agriculture as the way to both hopefully retire securely and financially securely, and then two, do some good with the time and skills that I have. So yeah, it's interesting to be a part of Extension now. And working for a larger institution and thinking how Extension plays a part in, not just local and state stuff, but federal things as well, and figure out how, with all the history that we have and all the resources that we have, where do you first start?
I can't
moving
imagine
some stuff around.
Yeah. I onboarding with PASA has been an amazing experience over the past year, but likewise, just so much to learn and so many amazing connections to catch up to. I worked in community and economic development prior to working with PASA. I was doing project management with some Main Street organizations as well as some county and city organizations.
Nice. Here in Pennsylvania?
So both Pennsylvania and Maryland. I live in Western Maryland, so I'm just across the state line over here. Bedford County, PA is my closest Pennsylvania county. And if I left my house now, I think I could be to the county line in roughly 12 minutes. We're in that really skinny part of Maryland over here. So I work for a Main Street entity in Bedford, as well as for their county economic development entity, and then for the city of Cumberland here in Maryland.
Okay. Nice. Well, you could give this presentation then. You should. I said you should be giving this presentation then.
I was excited for the topic. Asset mapping is amazing, and I'm excited to see what they come up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to think. It's fun to try and imagine where people are coming into this conversation from. Have they participated in something like this before and they're already like, all right, with the sticky notes, or are they completely new and the words community development, economic development are completely like new terms? Yeah, and just trying to guess where people are and figure out what's the most important content, what are the key takeaways, and then what yeah, just how to be a resource it's an interesting challenge, interesting puzzle here.
I think generative work like this for groups with a common goal is so important. And it's nice to anchor back to that, whether it's new or something that they're practicing again.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah.
This is the 5:30 mark is a long day for me. I work a little earlier in the morning and my days a little earlier.
Yeah, especially with the sun going down. It's
Time change is a very real factor in energy and focus levels.
Yeah.
Indeed. It looks like they're getting a lot of good stuff going here.
Yeah, I was supposed to yeah, I'm so glad that group 2's just knocked it out of the park. I was supposed to head over to group 2's room, but had to pull an audible and move Katie over so that I could stay here managing the breakout room.
Nice. I was in group 2 and we got there were just 4 of us to begin with, and quickly realized we had no leader, if you will. And it was a nice way to meet everybody and break the ice.
Yeah, that seems at least half the goal here is mixing it up in different combinations of people and getting them to make some connections and do something, learn a little something and do something that's a little generative, and then come back for more. Hello and welcome back.
Oh, surprise. I wasn't keeping an eye on time and you caught me mid-thought.
Nice. Well, Tabitha and I were just hanging out. Katie, thank you so much for jumping into the facilitator role. I appreciate that while I was hanging out here, managing the breakout.
So I'm gonna, let's see, I'm gonna share the Jamboard. Can everyone see the board in Zoom?
Yep.
Okay. Does someone want to, from group 1, want to share what the process was like in your breakout room? Or maybe share some of the assets that you added to the board? Who did we have in room 1?
So
Let's
I
see.
wasn't, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say I wasn't in group 1 because I'm not sure if there was a group 1, but I hopped over and added a few things onto the like physical and land side. I added Presque Isle / Lake Erie because it's a really big asset in the area. We also have plenty of urban farms, as agriculture was one of the examples on the page that we were looking at. And then I also added LEAF, which is the Lake Erie Arboretum at Frontier Park, which I thought all fell into really good physical / land assets in the area.
Those are great. I can vouch for Presque Isle being a tremendous asset. I spent a good portion of my Saturday there. I made the trip from Lancaster to Erie to visit my aunt, and we took a drive around Presque Isle, and it's such a gem. Does anyone from group 2 want to share a little bit about what happened in our room, what the process looked like, or how the process felt for you?
I think we had fun. This is a similar thing to what a few of us were part of with a Miro board activity probably about 18 months ago. And we were talking about how we were going to think about doing a community food system assessment. And so we weren't here yet in terms of like the actual, oh, here's how you really attack this kind of thing. But the visualization, this is a good reminder of how helpful the visualization is. So if one of you can move it to the group 2 screen.
Are you seeing that now?
No,
What am I sharing?
just group 1, that's all I see.
Let's see.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had, I think like the only debate we had is thinking, is this an institution or an organization? So we just kept listing a whole bunch of things, and it was also cool because I think that we intuitively thought of culture in a very broad way, and I think that's a very important part of this. So yeah, it was rewarding. I won't read everything off, but if anybody has any questions, or if anybody else from the group wants to mention anything, please feel free.
I'll just reiterate that I said this in our group, but for the good of the larger group, I think the categories can be helpful to sort of organize your thoughts and get the inspiration flowing. But when you're in there doing the process, I think, does it fit into this category or that category on the first pass? I think maybe that doesn't matter as much. You can sort through all of the results later and figure out where they best align so that you can use the information in the way that you need to. But just to get the creative juices flowing, just to get everything out of your head and onto paper, the screen, the wall, wherever that activity lives, I think is really the place to start. And I like to ask myself, who are the organizations or institutions or cultural elements that I'm already engaging with? What are those that are a part of my life? And then I can sort of grow the circle from there. Okay, well, what do I know? Who are the newsletters I'm subscribed to? And what are my friends talking about, the services, the organizations that they engage with? What am I seeing on the billboards? What do I hear in church? So I think it helps to throw a wide net and to think beyond the folks that are already engaged in food system work. I think, as Jay will mention, I think a little bit later, we could do this with a specific problem or issue in mind and build it around there. But I think when we throw a really broad net and we brainstorm everyone and everything, then we have more to work with to build those really creative solutions, to build rich relationships with the folks that we might not otherwise think to reach out to. And I think that's where the real power lies. Any last thoughts on this activity?
I'm just curious, as we're thinking of assets, like I was just thinking about my neighborhood, and there's a Sikh cultural society a few blocks over, and I know about it, but it's not something that I go to or know like how people feel about it. So like, is that an asset that I would list even though I don't have a relationship with it? Or how do
I'd
you
say absolutely. I think we don't have to have an in, and I think this exercise sometimes can be the the catalyst for getting it in, for making that introduction. Even saying, we're doing this project where we're thinking about who's in our community, and I don't have a relationship with anyone here, and I'd like to learn more. That can be a great opportunity. So this activity could actually be a door opener to build those relationships that don't already exist.
Thank you.
That's a great point, Pearl. Great. Jay, you ready? I'll pass it back to you if you're ready to take us on home.
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay.
Let's see. So we just have a couple more slides here. You're seeing presenter mode now, right?
Yes.
Now we're good? Okay. So asset mapping is a tool. The whole point of our presentation today was to demonstrate that tool and think about how it could be put to use. Asset-based community development, that kind of broader context, we're not going to focus on needs, we're going to focus on assets, we're going to have the heart at the middle of this thing, we're going to think creatively and broadly about how we could work together to address whatever issues we might collectively face. That's asset-based community development is a toolkit. And so there's a lot of tools in there that can be put to use. So this is really the tip of the iceberg for anybody that's interested in this, and there are steps that come after the initial round of sticky notes. We're really just focusing on the first round of sticky notes today. So 2 ways to think about asset mapping, or 2 ways to approach asset mapping, which I'm broadly going to call this sticky note thing, is either with or without a specific issue in mind. So there's 2 kind of approaches to using this tool. The first way that you could think about using this tool is without a specific issue or problem in mind that would narrow your focus. So as an organization or a network like a Food Policy Council, you could make asset mapping a regular part of your activities. You could have asset mapping 5 minutes on every meeting's agenda, and take the approach that we always map all the available assets in our community with an open mind. We think creatively and strategically about how they might be applied to our shared goals and challenges. And you could generate kind of an ever evolving map or database or Rolodex, or whatever format, whatever online tool. It doesn't really matter if it's Jamboard or Miro or something else that ends in a vowel and is spelled in some sort of novel way. You use whatever tool you want to kind of create that map of the people, institutions, organizations, the resources that you could connect to work together towards shared goals. So that's kind of the blank slate approach, where we don't know what the problem is. We're not starting with the problem. We're all aware that there's problems and deficiencies in our community. Where are the grocery stores? Why isn't there a bus? But we're going to take on asset mapping as an approach, as a philosophy almost, to the way that we conduct our Food Policy Council's business. So that's asset mapping without a specific issue or problem in mind. The other way, which is probably a little bit more, I don't know, it's a little bit more direct, let's say that, is to start with a specific issue or problem or purpose in mind. So here you would start with a question rather than a blank slate, which can be a little bit more accessible for people, a little bit more relevant. It can be a little bit kind of more targeted and focused. So if you're trying to engage people, it's a lot easier to start with a question like, why don't we have a grocery store in this particular area of the city? And then think about, well, who would need to use a grocery store? Who would have influence over a grocery store? Who would we have to talk to get a grocery store? All down the chain of all the different ways that a community would be connected to a grocery store. So rather than gradually mapping everyone and everything across a community, you start with the goal of finding a targeted solution, and then you apply this asset mapping tool to that issue. So a couple other questions that you could start with, just some other examples. What needs to be done to improve the health outcomes of a specific population in our community? That's our purpose. We're going to take this asset mapping sticky note thing. We're going to take this tool and apply it to that question. We're going to think broadly about all the different assets in our community that are affected by those words, what needs to be done to improve the health outcomes of a specific population in our community that could have impact on that, that would benefit from that, that could support that effort. Other questions that might be considered in this kind of context, how could transportation and walk or bikeability be improved to get everyone in our community where they want and need to go consistently, conveniently, and affordably? Starting with the question like that, again, helps narrow down the focus, makes it a lot more accessible to people to start putting sticky notes on a board. There is, let's see, and one other example. So this doesn't just have to be a community issue, like those examples words escape me. But just like those examples, it could also be an organizational goal. So if the Erie Food Policy Council is a pretty new organization, we're thinking strategically about what we need to do over the next 2 to 3 years to start making progress on the goals that we're all coming together to kind of, make some movement on, get things shaken. We're going to use this tool of asset mapping to approach the organizational priorities that we have over the next 2 to 3 years. What assets are out there? Who should we talk to? Who do we already talk to? Who do we need to build relationships with to get this, to get our organization down the road 2 to 3 years from now? So a lot of different ways to use this tool. One caution when you're considering this second approach, where you're crafting a specific question, and then you're going to asset map. You're going to use this wrench of asset mapping to figure out how to answer that question. It's really important to carefully craft that question. You have to make sure that the question you're starting with is not just your top priority or your pet project, but it's especially if it's a community question. So if it's an organizational question, it's like, okay, what's the Erie Food Policy Council? What do we need to do for the next 2 to 3 years? Let's asset map a whole bunch of resources that we can put to use to achieve our organizational goals. That's specific, that's kind of internal and organizational question. So there's not too many caveats about that one. If though you're thinking about community goals, then you really need to be extra careful to make sure that the question you're crafting is a priority in the eyes of everyone affected. That the scope of the question, you could think that it's really important to you, but it's not a top priority to people in Erie County because they're faced with other more pressing issues that need to be addressed first. Or you could move forward with a lower priority, just recognizing that the people that you're trying to engage, some of those assets that you brainstorm, some of the people that you try to get to your meeting to do the stuff with the sticky notes might have other issues that are more pressing that prevent them from participating fully. When you're coming up with a question in this kind of community solutions context to then use asset mapping on, you also want to think about the scope of your question, making it both kind of threading the needle between being specific enough and general enough. And there's no real perfect way to do that. But that's just something to keep in mind. You don't want to be too specific, but you also don't want to be too broad. And take care to consider any blind spots that you might have as you're crafting that question. So it's probably good to seek the advice of others, a broad cross-section of people in Erie County about this question before going down the road of we're doing the whole sticky note game. And then So once you've decided where you'll start asset mapping, either or both as a general practice, this is just something we do, this is part of our organizational DNA, or we have a specific goal or purpose that we're going to use this tool on, then you consider how you're going to do that, and make a rough draft, an editable plan of how you'll create an asset map, what particular tool or sticky note thing you're going to use, who you're going to invite, and then how those assets that you map in that first activity or those first couple of activities with the sticky notes, you're going to start to organize those people or those organizations, start to reach out to those individuals, build relationships, and then start to work together on whatever that issue is. And then also how or if that's going to change over time, because it likely will. I think that's it. I think that's it. Sometimes I get a little frustrated with asset mapping and community development in general, just to be candid, because I feel like there's like never ending sticky notes. And so it can kind of feel like we get in a room and we talk about something, we talk about this problem, we generate a bunch of excitement and ideas, and then the question is always, well, what do we do next? It's kind of a cliffhanger ending to our presentation today, but I think that's like a stay tuned. What do you do after that? So it's either a cliffhanger ending or it's you do whatever you want. The Food Policy Council, the Erie Food Policy Council, again, that we have the privilege here to present to you guys, know a lot of the issues that your community faces, have ideas about how to address them, and asset mapping is just one tool to start to get in the middle there between, we know there are issues and problems facing people in our community and we'd like to get somewhere better, please. And asset mapping is one of those tools that you can put to use. So a couple of resources that Becky mentioned, let's see, are on the last slide here. So we'll share this slide deck as a PDF, and all these links will go to their associated websites. There's a ton of information. There's a whole world of higher education and academic literature about community economic development, and then about asset-based community development, and then about asset mapping, and kind of all the different ways we try to work together as flawed humans. But here are a couple of resources that Becky took the time to curate for everybody. So if anybody has questions, we're always available. We'll make sure that our contact info is here either individually or organizationally. I think the next question really is, given the presentation that Becky and I just gave, this concept of asset mapping, kind of this tool or this approach, how do the people in this group think that this could be put to work towards your organizational goals or your community efforts? And that's really the question for everybody here.
First, I'd like to say thank you to you both. Really, you've given us a lot to think about here and to chew on. I really appreciate how broad this tool could be used and also how focused it can be as well. And it's helpful to me just here because sometimes we think it has to be the thing when really we can fine tune that focus, our intentions more clearly or broadly. Does anyone have any questions for Jay or Becky or anything else they would like to add to the conversation here?
I think this is extremely helpful, and I want to echo Steph's gratitude for to both of you for joining us and clarifying a lot of the things that we often talk about. I mean, this is, I think, really, I don't know, Becky, I think this was your phrase, like get it out of your head and onto paper, you know, just visualizing this stuff and not kind of carrying it around in conversation form is really, really valuable. I know that our struggle, probably any organizational struggle, is that like, okay, now what do we do? You know, and what do we, we talked about this when leadership met with you all individually. I mean, one of the big challenges, we know that we need to get other people directing us. We don't want to be the ones coming into a community that we don't belong to and saying, okay, well, we've decided these are your assets. Congratulations. And so I think that that's really an ongoing challenge for us, something that we'll just have to continue to work on.
Yeah, I thank you, Katie, for that. And it's been such a treat for me to join you all and to spend a little time prior to today hearing about the efforts of the Erie Food Policy Council and the great work that they're already doing. And I would just reiterate that the asset mapping is like it's really the warm-up part of this. It's step one in a multi-step process where the real meat of it, the real power and the warm and fuzzies and the meaningful work comes from the relationship part. And so identifying who should we know, who should we be friends with, be working with, be asking for their input, who should we invite to our table, whose table should we go to? That's the good stuff. That's where the work happens. This is the warm up for that.
Again, thank you. My wheels are spinning for sure. We've done a little bit of work with walking assessment, and I think this is going to help us continue that work and yeah, I'm excited to see what comes. Are you two okay with hanging around for our general meeting, or is this where we part our ways for now? Only for now. I do hope that we can tap into your wonderful brain.
Unfortunately, I do need to hop off, but I so appreciate spending this time with you all this evening, and I look forward to hearing what's next for the Erie Food Policy Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I'll sit quietly and listen.
Okay. All right. So there's nothing else for our speaker series here. We're gonna